Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Weaving Worlds. Something that occurred to me a long time ago is that speculative fiction works tend to be dominated by narratives in which the antagonist is an active force and the protagonist is a reactive force. In other words, the villain of the story wants something, and it's up to the heroes to stop them. What you see much less often is the opposite. The hero wants to achieve something, and the villains are trying to stop them. But while that second type of story is less common, they can be just as gripping and epic as the first type. You just have to understand the kind of heroic motivations that can sustain a plot, and how they differ from villainous motivations. As such, you can consider this to be a companion video to the one I made about villainous motivations, and just like how those motivations can inform evil cults and conspiracies, heroic motivations can inform good organizations, and make them more complex than just let's stop the bad guys. Questing for glory. In the video game series Monster Hunter, the titular monsters are big, aggressive, dangerous, and, at least for the most part, minding their own business out in the middle of nowhere. Monster hunters aren't out killing monsters to defend their homes. They're killing monsters for money, cool armor, unusual foods, and the bragging rights that come from bagging the biggest beasts. Sometimes a hero just wants to get famous, and the reason they do good deeds is not to protect people, but to earn their admiration and get rich. Sometimes that means reacting to an active villain, but other times it means slaying a dragon just so you can mount its head on your wall as a trophy. Still other times a hero might be inspired to be the first to explore a distant land, the first to climb a tall mountain, or the victor of a tough competition or a race. In fact, with a competition, you could center your story around several protagonists, all of whom act as antagonists to each other. Building something new. For at least one definition of good versus evil, good is based around creating something useful or beautiful, while evil is about destroying good things, either so that the evil people can hoard the remaining scraps for themselves, or so that no one else will get to enjoy the good things. This definition lends itself to narratives where good people defend good things from evil enemies, but what if you center the narrative on creating that good thing instead? The reason authors don't often do so is because building something good doesn't sound like it can support a strong conflict, which is what a story needs. But if that's what you think, you just need to zoom out a bit, and you'll find all kinds of good conflicts you can hang a story on. For instance, if the protagonist wants to build a new community in the wilderness, they may run afoul of aggressive neighbors who want to claim the now valuable land. Or they may have to defend their egalitarian society against entrenched aristocrats who want the status quo to continue. Or maybe the protagonist is an inventor, and their inventions cause all kinds of crazy side effects like unexpected time travel, clones, or size changes. Repairing what's broken. In the video game Fallout, the reason the protagonist leaves Vault 13 is because their water purifier is wearing out, and they need to find a replacement. You eventually stumble upon an evil mastermind who wants to turn everyone into super mutants, but at least for the first act or so, the protagonist's needs are the main driving force of the plot. In Fallout 2, the protagonist's hometown of Arroyo is dying of drought, and you need to find a Gek, a Garden of Eden creation kit, so that you can terraform the land and save the village. Like the first game, the plot eventually moves on from this need, but the search for a Gek lasts for well over half the game. This motivation can also include situations where the protagonist needs to find a cure for a deadly disease, or else get the cure to the people who need it, like in the film Balto. You could also tell an environmental story about ending a source of pollution. And if there's some greedy industrialist who wants the pollution to continue, then the action, the initiative, still lies with the protagonist. The hero is taking action because they want to change things, and the villain is reacting because they want things to stay the same. Smashing the state. Think of this category as building on that last comment I made. When you position the protagonists as rebels, revolutionaries, protesters, whatever label you want to give them, then they automatically have the initiative because they want to change the status quo. The villains are those who are in power and thus want the status quo to stay the same. However, speculative fiction often ignores this opportunity by having the villains in charge build towards some big moment or some big device that will allow them to power up and become completely unstoppable, instead of just mostly unstoppable. And while that is an easy way to build to a climax, it also gives the initiative back to the villain. Let's look at the original Star Wars for an example. At the start of the movie, the Empire has basically won. The Emperor has dissolved the Senate, all resistance is being crushed in brutal displays, and while the Rebel Alliance is a nuisance, they don't have the materials or the manpower to pose a serious threat. They even built a moon-sized space station that can blow up planets in a single shot. So, the Rebel Alliance takes the initiative. They steal the plans to the Death Star, they spend most of the movie trying to get the plans to the Rebel headquarters, and once they do, they attack the station and target its weak point. On the other hand, in Return of the Jedi, the Empire has the initiative, and the Rebels react to them building a second Death Star, and because of that, their attack goes much less smoothly. Finding a family. For some stories, this motivation is literal. A family member has gone missing, and the protagonist is searching the land to find them. Or perhaps their entire community has gone missing, like in the old LucasArts game Loom, in which all of the weavers on Loom Isle turn into swans and fly off, and the protagonist, Bobbin Threadbare, spends most of the rest of the game looking for them. Or you could also frame things like the Odyssey, and have the protagonist start some distance from home, and spend the rest of the story trying to get back. Another way you can use this motivation is to have the protagonist look for a new family, either a found family consisting of a small group of friends, or else a larger community that will accept them for who they are. Typically, this kind of story starts with the protagonist getting rejected from their birth family or community, but you could also start things off by having the community die off thanks to some disaster. Or maybe they are supportive, but they just don't offer the opportunities that the protagonist is looking for. Searching for a better life. Once again, there's a bit of overlap between this category and the last one. However, while a better life can include acceptance from friends and family, it also covers more dire situations, like escaping from an oppressive regime or fleeing from a natural disaster. And while the protagonist might want to join a more accepting community, they could also found a new community out in the wilderness, or else take the old community with them as part of a mass migration. For instance, in the book I recently published, Skyflight, shameless plug, the primary conflict of the story is the desire to get from one floating island to a second island, where the government is at least thought to be less misogynistic. The novel does feature an antagonist, but his role in the story is reactive. He wants to catch the protagonists and bring them home to face justice, and he wouldn't be doing anything if the protagonists hadn't acted first. And that is exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about when I describe a protagonist-led story. Surviving harsh conditions. Person versus nature is perhaps the most rarely used conflict in storytelling, but you can still use it to create a gripping narrative where there are no bad guys, society is not to blame, the protagonists have no personal issues to speak of, and yet surviving to see the next sunrise is always in doubt. And while there are films like Castaway which focus on survival in a modern-day setting, by using a science fiction or fantasy setting, you can make a survival story a whole lot weirder and more unpredictable. What if an Earthling were to crash land on an alien planet, one where none of the plants are recognizable, and all of the animals blend in with the foliage? What if all the plants and animals in a fantasy forest can talk, and beg you not to eat them, even though you're completely out of food? Or what if you get stuck on a floating island that rotates every 8 hours, and will throw you off if you don't stay on the top? The point of a person versus nature conflict is that nature is unforgiving and unpredictable, and you can boost both of these traits when you leave reality behind. Any story that features both a hero and a villain should give both characters strong motivations. However, you don't always need a villain to tell a good speculative story, and when you do have a villain, you can still have your hero's motivation be the center of the story. So when you're setting out your plots and arranging your heroic organizations, think about what they might want to do, and not just what they want to stop. Thanks for joining me again for today's journey into weaving worlds. Please like, share, and subscribe because that raises my visibility here on YouTube. Check out my other stuff if you have some time, support me on Patreon if you have some money, and I hope I'll see you again for the next video.